So we've talked a bit about the kind of shared foundations of this Hebrew faith, of this God of the Bible, of the Jews, a God in many ways shared by Jews, Christians, and Muslims, this Abrahamic faith, the people that descend from the faith of Abraham and the stories of his family. But I want to move more specifically into kind of what brings us to the place of modern Judaism and what that is. And so the foundation of Jewishness and Judaism, there's some complexity to this, but it starts with a story of God and his people. And if you'll remember, we talked about in Hinduism and Buddhism, history is not so essential. This idea of a beginning and an end. Things move cyclically, and from some interpretations of Hinduism, the cycles repeat themselves forever. Within the Abrahamic faith, there is this sense of a beginning and an end. And the end leads to an eternity and comes out of an eternity, but there is a consistent story, a storyline, a plot, a key figures and characters, and a definite sense of progress, of motion, of moving towards deeper truth, of fuller understanding. These ideas are central, and it's rooted in story, and story as history, not just as fables or mythological explanations, but as real history is the idea behind this faith. And so the Jewishness and the religion of Judaism that we're going to see as we go on, that they're complex, they start with the story. And so where does this come from? Well, Judaism, the name, is the religion of the Jewish people, historically speaking. And it originates from the tribe of Judah. We'll see that the Hebrew people, the children of Abraham, they're descended into these tribes, and at one point the ruling tribe is the tribe of Judah. And so eventually, as history would have it, the faith takes its name from that tribe. Prior to this, they're referred to as the Hebrews, meaning nomads. They're referred to as the Israelites. This derived from, so we have Abraham and then Isaac and then Jacob, and Jacob wrestles with God, and God blesses him and changes his name to Israel, and the people take the name of their nation from Israel, meaning Prince of God. They're the people of God. Modern people in the nation of Israel today are called Israelis, not Israelites. But that ancient name descending to the patriarch Jacob or Israel were the Israelites. So where does this come from? These people of Israel, the Israelites, they conquer the region of Palestine, and there's this division among tribes. They're rescued from Egypt in the Exodus, God's rescue through the person of Moses, and we'll talk about that more. But once they leave Egypt, they spend time in the wilderness. The first generation to leave Egypt, the oldest generation, they rebel against God, so finally God says, you can't go into the promised land. But their children enter into this land of promise, this Canaanite region. It's really probably inaccurate to call it the conquest of Palestine. At the time, it's the conquest of Canaan, the land of Canaan. And once they enter, they divide the land between the tribes. And there is this Ark of the Covenant, this sacred box. It's covered in gold. It's at the center of tabernacle worship, which will later become temple worship, and we'll talk about that. But this, the priests have this specially made tent that houses this ark, and this is where the priests go to practice this kind of sacrificial system. And the earliest texts are the Torah, or the Pentateuch, is the first 5 books, traditionally called the 5 books of Moses, or the books of the law. And much of this tells the story of the patriarchs of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and their descendants, of Moses, of the being freed from slavery in Egypt, the Exodus with that. But then much of it goes into discussion of worship, the law, and tabernacle worship, and a sacrificial system, and a priestly order. There's no central national government at first. There's a priestly order that orders worship and handles certain social functions. But day in and day out life is governed in the sort of tribal system. And there's this confederacy between the tribes. Sometimes there's even infighting. The book of Judges, we'll talk about this more later, but it's an intriguing book because it deals with this first period, and we see many problems, the different tribes not obeying God, not living as they should, infighting between the tribes. And many scholars, though the writers of the synopsis that you read, or will read if you haven't read it, argue that the Judges is a period of mostly good times with a few bad times. Most scholars don't go with that idea. That's rooted in modern Judaism that values independence and free will. Many scholars think that the book of Judges was written as a sort of argument for why Israel needs a king. Because it says on 3 instances very clearly, there was no king in the land, and everyone does what was right in their own eyes. And so at first you have this arrangement. It's a confederacy. There's no king. There's pressures from outside. There's failures from inside. There's infighting. But eventually, like I said, you have these tribes, but you also have surrounding peoples. You see Moab, the Moabites, the Philistines, and you have Ammon. So you have these surrounding peoples, and sometimes intermingled peoples that threaten the various tribes that rise to prominence and try to take control. And like I said, you have the kind of inward failures of morality and religious loyalty. And so there seems to be this push for the desire for a kingdom. And those, like I said, those stories about what's going on at this time, about the founding of the nation, about the founding of the tribes, about the escape, the exodus from Egypt, the time of the judges, all these are kind of polemical stories, sometimes about surrounding peoples, sometimes about the peoples of the various tribes, but mostly about God, and less so about the people. Now you do have some stories that are, how did Moab come to be? It's not a very nice story, though you have contending stories where a Moabite woman is the hero of the Jewish story. So it's not strictly about the people as much as it is about God. Who is God? What is God like? How is God different from the gods of the surrounding peoples? And we see that in the creation account, which we've talked about in the discussion board. We see that in asking, who is this God? What is he like? Not only in creation, but in the law. How are we to worship him? And also in the stories of the freeing of the people from slavery in Egypt. And so you have this story of the Exodus with Moses, um, and he appears to Moses in a bush that's on fire but isn't consumed. And it says, take off your sandals, for you're standing as holy ground. That means otherness, it has this otherness aspect. But he says, I'm the God of Abraham, of your fathers, Abraham, of Isaac, of Jacob. It says, Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. This kind of fear of God, this greatness of God, this God history. We've talked about that some already, but it's very prominent here. Who is this God? What is he like? Well, he's seen his people. He's seen their suffering in slavery. And so he's concerned for them. He wants to set them free. And he wants to provide for them blessing. And so he is the God who takes the side of the oppressed, who takes the side of the slaves over the oppressive masters. And so this is kind of the nature of this God. Furthermore, he is a God that's beyond all things. Just like in the beginning, the other stories of creation that we see in this region, Babylon, Egypt, Assyria, Sumeria, these gods, oftentimes there's like chaos, there's a sea, and the first God comes up out of the sea. But Genesis 1 is very precise and very specific, and its opening is very just straightforward. In the beginning, God, not the chaos, not the sea, nothing else. God is first. And this is important for the Hebrew telling of the story. And so you have it's the God of your fathers, but then he also says to Moses, when Moses says, what's your name? What do I tell people is your name? And God says, I am who I am. This 4 Hebrew letters that go from right to left, not left to right, Yod, He, Wah, He. We're not 100% sure how it's pronounced. Typically it's understood to be Yahweh. And this is referred to as the Tetragrammaton, as 4 letters. And this is the name of God, and it's held in such reverence that Jews oftentimes, especially more mystical Jews, practicing Jews, will not say this, and nor will they say in Hebrew. You don't see people saying of themselves, I am, right? I am going to do this, or I am Jacob, or anything like that. The I am, when referenced to anyone other than God, is always implied in verb forms and noun forms. It's not said because it's the name of God, and if God is I am, then nothing else can be I am. And actually later, in later centuries, this name, this Tetragrammaton, is seen as so important that oftentimes it's used almost as magical or mystical. It has power. The name itself, the written name. Even when that's not the case, it's held with such respect. Oftentimes Jews, practicing Jews and devout Jews, will not write the English word God fully. They'll write a G with a dash and a D. Because the name of God is taken so seriously. God is something other, and that must be remembered. Still, because of this main teaching of one God, that He exists, like I said, this name is sacred. The core kind of statement of faith is the Shema. It comes from the first Hebrew word of the statement, which is Shema Yisrael, Yahweh Elohinu, Yahweh Echad, which is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. This is a statement from the Pentateuch, from the book of Deuteronomy, Here it is in English. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. This is the core of the Hebrew faith, of the Jewish faith. And this is a core that remains to practicing Jews to this day. This is one of the kind of unchanging core principles coming from the earliest writings, earliest practices to now.